Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me today on today's webinar, which is all about acing your job interview and giving you some top tips of how to excel at interviews within a few interview formats, excuse me. So just to introduce myself, my name is Amy Andrews. I'm the Head of Resourcing Solutions here at Jobs Go Public. I've worked in recruitment for a long time, so I should be able to give you some top tips and some advice on how to secure your next interview. So just to start off today, this session will be recorded. So if anybody hasn't been able to log in, then it will be available on demand. At the end of the session, we'll also give you some top tips, a takeaway for you to take as well. So in terms of interviews, so what is an interview? So an interview is a conversation between two or more people, typically conducted for the purpose of gathering information and assessing your qualifications and your experience and your suitability for a job or position. I'm going to go in a little bit later on in the workshop to give you some ideas of some areas of what interviews are. And also give you some understanding of what different types of what type of interviews there are, and also how you can succeed in those as well. So the first thing to do is, great, you've got an interview, you've been marked as shortlisted by the client. So by securing an interview, you're already halfway there within the process. It's really important that before your interview that you're really prepared for that interview. I know it sounds silly, but it's important to prepare. People are assessing you for your capabilities and skills against the opportunity, but also from managers' perspectives, they want to make sure that you're a good fit for them, but also for you to gather a good information about the client that you'd be working for. So some top tips here to look there. So review the job description and highlight the keywords. So review the JD that you've seen, highlight information that you see on that job description, things that you're asking for qualification for in terms of what qualification do you need, but also for the client to reconfirm what they mean within that job description. It can come in really handy when you come to the end of the interview and ask an organisation questions. So look over your CV. You would have probably already tailored your CV to meet the requirements of the job and also provided a covering letter. So there is information within that CV and that covering letter that you've given to the organisation. That means they want to interview you. So read over, remember what you've put, because it can be quite disheartening when somebody gets to an interview and they completely forget what they've put in their covering letter, because you obviously may have sent out a few more. So look over the covering letter. Create a list of achievements and real life examples related to the job. I am going to go through the STAR technique a little bit later. So just jot down some key achievements, some key milestones that you've done within your previous role. And that'll really give you some top tips when you come to interview for that. Make sure if they have asked you for any certificates or other qualifications, that you do have those to hand. Things like maybe a DBS check that you might need to bring to an interview, any right to work documents that they may have asked you to provide, or examples of work. For example, if you work in marketing, they might ask you to provide some examples of creative content that you might have been produced before. And it's also really important to research the company, their products, if they're a sales organisation, if they're in the public sector, find out more about what that organisation does. Have a look on LinkedIn. All organisations will have a website, and they'll probably have a careers page where you can find out lots more information about what they are as an organisation. And actually you can use that in your feedback from the interview when you're asking the manager questions. Practicing interview questions is really important. No matter how seasoned we are within interviewing, it can be quite a scary process. So it's really important that you do try and practice some questions if you can. And also, like I said before, prepare some questions to take to the interviewer. So it could be based on something that you've read online about the organisation. It could be based on the job description. I will give you some information about some typical questions to ask. And also maybe try a mock interview. If this is your first interview, if it's an interview that you've never done before, or you haven't done an interview for a long time, that is also helpful to try and do a mock interview as well, to try and sort of practice your skills, and so that you can start to remember how to actually interview. So I'm going to do a little poll here to you. It would be really interesting to find out from you guys on the webinar. Do you actually do your own interviews? So if anybody would like to answer, click yes or no. Do you do a mock interview before your answers, before you go for an interview? I'll give you a couple of minutes there just to... I'll give you another couple of seconds to answer that question. Okay, so I'm ending the poll there. I'm going to share the results with you all. So 64% of you don't do a mock interview before your interview. I would say if you can do a mock interview, do, and I'm going to go on to that. So it's quite interesting that some of you do, which is fantastic, and some of you, quite a huge percentage of you don't. Obviously, there's no right and wrong. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. So mock interviews. So no matter what kind of interview you're invited to, whether it be a chat, a conversation, a formal interview, it could be one round, they're really helpful to boost your confidence. So obviously here on this slide, they boost your confidence. It gives you the ability to practice your answers and pinpoint any areas for improvement. We're always learning, we're always continuous in what we do. So it's really important that we do, if we've got areas that we're struggling with, to actually have an idea of some answers so that we can really improve. And it allows you to practice your responses, build natural progression. Obviously, I've done a couple of webinars before. It's new to me, so it's quite good to practice and get your answers right. Obviously, on the day, nerves always get you, but it's really important to do try and see if you can do them. So you can do them in front of a mirror, however you feel comfortable. You can record yourself to see how you come across in an interview. You can try practicing with your family or friends, or use a careers advisor or recruiter. So if you're working with a recruiter and they found you a position, then the recruiter who has put you forward for the job or got you that interview, they will be more than happy to do a mock interview with you, to give you some feedback on how you came across in that interview. So we do highly recommend that you do at least a little bit of a practice before you go ahead and do that interview. So what will you need to know before the interview? So there's lots of questions that I would ask, and hopefully in your interview information that you've had from your organisation, you'll have had some details about what the format will be. So what is the format? Is it in person? Is it a telephone interview? Is it virtual? Do you have to be there in person, or is it over like today, Zoom, Teams, or is it something like an assessment day? So these are sort of formats that you want to know. You'll also want to know who is going to be interviewing you. Is it a line manager? Is it HR? If this is a first stage interview, it could be with a member of the HR team. It could be with a manager. It's always really good to find out who is going to be doing the interview. And if it is more than one person, who are these people? Is it HR, a manager, a couple of team managers? Don't be alarmed if there's more than one person going to be interviewing within that panel. Sometimes in interviews, it's really good to get another person's perspective. And if, for example, you're doing a big round of interviews, there may be a couple of people involved if you're going to be working in a big team, just to gauge what your understanding of the organisation is. And also, it just prepares you. So what you don't want to do is walk into a interview in person or on virtual interview and be shocked if there's more than one person there. So please do ask them and find out who those interview panel members are. And also, what do you need to take with you? Is there anything you need to prepare for? Do you, like I mentioned before, need to provide examples of your work? Is there a presentation that you may have to provide or prepare for, or a plan? For example, teachers are often asked for a lesson plan. Do you have to take a lesson plan with you for an interview? So it's good to make sure that you know what you need to take. And also just so that you can be really prepared. So interview formats. So there's lots of different interview formats that we take on board. So face-to-face interviews, obviously you meet in person. You'll have to go mainly to their office, to their organisation, to their location, and you'll meet somebody face-to-face. It's a good way to shake their hand, meet them in person, see what they're like as an individual, because also, even though you're interviewing for the job, you also need to really interview the organisation. Is this an organisation that really sort of marries your values, your culture, what you're looking for in an organisation, because that's what you want to do. So obviously they will also feel a little bit nervous as well. Virtual interview videos. So again, very much similar to what we're doing today. We're doing a meeting on a Zoom platform. Again, it could be panel members, it could be just one or two other people, but it's really important that you are prepared if it's going to be face-to-face, if it's going to be in person. And also group interviews. So sometimes within some industries, for example, care industries, a lot of organisations will do a group interview. And the reason why they do group interviews or assessment centres is to really get a feel for what you are like as a person within a team environment. Could be under pressure. It could give you a bit more of an idea of what goes on in that organisation. It tends to be around similar sort of things that you'd be doing in that job. So in my time in recruitment, there's been a number of panels that I've sat in on where we've done group interviews to gauge who in that group can take sort of the lead within that group, but also to encourage and mentor and coach people who might be a little bit more quiet in a group. So don't be alarmed if there is an assessment centre or group interview, because there's various different stages. There'll be lots of managers in those assessment centres looking for different things. So it's really important that you do come across really good and also really prepared for those sessions. Some people are often interviewed for an informal interview. So what I mean by informal interview, it could just be an informal chat about the position to gauge your experience to find out if you can be successful for an actual formal interview, but also just have a chat so the manager can get to know you, you can get to know them. So as a recruiter, I have informal interviews with lots of people to work out if I can help them secure a vacancy within a number of our clients, if they have got certain skills that may not be necessarily relevant on their CV or might not be prominent on their CV. So it just has a good informal chat about the job vacancy to start off with, because they might not be interested, you might not be interested in the job, but also you might not be interested in the organisation as an employer as well. Telephone interviews. Again, telephone interviews are normally done at the start of the process. So if you've been managed to get through the shortlisting from your CV, telephone interviews could be done by a manager or HR to gauge your experience, to then have a good conversation so that the recruiter or HR, for example, or maybe a different manager within that team can really get an understanding of you as a person, what you like and what you come across and your skills, so that actually you can make a much better decision based on your application. And also panel interviews as well. So I've touched upon that on previously, but panel interviews are normally with maybe 2 or 3 members of their team. And what tends to happen is it's normally at the latter stage. What you can also find out at the start of the process is how many people are going to be interviewing you, but also how many stages are they? Is it just a telephone interview and then a face-to-face interview? Is it just a virtual interview and then a presentation? It's really good that you are prepared and can answer those questions. Also, so face-to-face interviews. Okay, so these are usually carried out in an employee's office, and it's your opportunity to learn more about the environment and facilities. You may even get a glimpse of the work culture, and you'll probably get a show and tell of the office to see what the office is like, and you'll meet lots of different people within that organisation. So tips for a smooth face-to-face interview. So leave plenty of time to get there. If you can, if it's somewhere you haven't been before, you might want to do a trial run. To make sure that you get there on time. If you're travelling by public transport, then please check that there's no strikes or anything like that going to be coming up. Arrive early and report to reception. Report to where you need to be. So you should have been given the address, who to report to, and who's going to be interviewing you. So it's really important that you arrive early and report to reception. It's good to shake hands with your interviewer. Obviously, if you're not comfortable with doing that, then that's quite all right. It's good to meet people in person to see what they're actually like in person and how they interact. If you are offered a drink at any point, then I would say always take it. It's really good to have a glass of water with you, just in case you get a bit thirsty or you need some time to think about an answer. But it's really important to have that in the interview, and maintain good eye contact and use positive body language. You'll probably see that I like to talk with my hands, and I do try and keep my hands to myself when I'm trying to put something across. But obviously, you need to be you. You need to be you in an interview and be comfortable with being involved in that time. And also, like I mentioned, in terms of having a glass of water, if you need time to think in an interview, what you don't want to do is rush in and give a really quick answer to a question. You want to be able to respond and have a timely manner. If you're ever unsure about the question that someone is asking you, ask them to repeat it. The organisation might have asked if you needed some additional support within the interview. So it could be the case you already have the questions in front of you. It gives you an idea of having a glass of water, for example, gives you a way to take a moment. So you can take a moment, have a think about the question, take a drink, and then you can answer. And it gives you a bit of time to rethink of that question, or maybe ask the interviewer to repeat. And at the end of the interview, don't forget to ask questions to the interviewer. I am going to go on to that slightly later in the workshop, just to give some questions, but it is really important, no matter what interview you do, that you do ask some questions at the end, and I'll go into some reasons why that is later on today. So virtual interviews. So these can be on Google Meet, it can be Zoom, it could be Teams. It could be any system that the organisation uses. A lot of the time they're apps. You can download them on your phone and your computer, and you just be given a link to the website to log on to make sure you can get it. What I would make sure that you do is that you have, you know exactly what device it's going to be on, whether you need to have Google Meet, Zoom or Teams, or whatever they're using. And make sure that you have that downloaded onto maybe your laptop or your computer or your iPad or your phone, just to make sure that you can be there, and also test it to make sure that your video and your Microsoft settings work so that they can hear you and see you. Find a good location to make sure that you are away from any distracting noises. Pick somewhere that's not too far. You don't want to be miles away on a screen or up too close, and you want to be in a quiet area. Obviously, things happen. The postman will arrive. You'll get a package delivered. You could have children in the next room. It could be dogs, could be animals. People understand that. We live in a virtual world now. So don't be alarmed if your phone rings or your doorbell rings. I have been in a webinar before and my house phone's rung at the same time I've had somebody knock on the door. So we're used to that. As people who interview, we're used to it. And also you might find that actually it might happen to the person who's interviewing as well. Make sure you've got good internet connection. Obviously, we can't help it if things happen and internet goes down. I'm making sure that my laptop is plugged in and I've got power to make sure that I can do the webinar for you today. So yeah, it's really important that you do make sure that everything is charged. I noticed that a couple of you are raising hands. I will try and get some questions at the end of the session. But obviously there's a lot of people on today, and I don't want to obviously be sidetracked with trying to get information across to you guys. So thank you for sharing. You're putting your hands up. I just will try and get some questions at the end if we got some time to do that. But also there will be a sheet at the end of the session which I will provide to you. I would suggest also dressing professionally, to make sure that you are dressed in a professional manner, to make sure that you don't necessarily need to be suited and booted depending on the job that you're going for. But I would suggest that you are dressed appropriately for the position that you're going for, to make sure that you are suitably dressed for that interview. And also, what I'd also suggest is that you are looking at the computer, looking at the screen, making sure that people are, you've still trying to maintain eye contact, which can sometimes be quite hard to do once you're in an interview, especially when you're online. So do try and have a look and make sure that you've got the right body language across there. And also, if you are needing cues, things like post-it notes, to have a notepad with you to jot things down that you might want to remind yourself and ask later. Don't think that you can't take a notepad into an interview and write down questions to answer, or things that you want to go back to. It's really important that you do that. So group interviews. So group interviews might be set up on a full day. It might be a half-day session. Again, arrive early. You're probably going to be put into teams, into groups within that environment. So it's really important that you do say hello to the people that are also with you. I've actually been in panels before and come across people that I've met in a previous job, and also had conversations and people you sometimes make friends, and I've met a couple of friends from working in this session. So it's really important that you do work with your fellow interviewees, because it builds a little bit of rapport. It shows that you can build rapport with people and actually work with other people and get to know people. So it's really good that you do say hello, be polite to everybody that you meet, and have a good sort of experience, because it can be quite daunting, but also it can be quite fun, because you'll get to do things that maybe are quite important within that role. So again, use active body language. Showcase your confidence. You don't want to come across too confident within some aspects, depending on what sort of jobs that you're going through. For example, teachers, you want to make sure that you can have some confidence and control a classroom of children. So it's really important that you do show that you're confident, even if you are a little bit nervous. But also, like I said before, people are always nervous, as well as other people within that group interview, or within the people who are actually going to be observing you. Be a good listener. I think that's really important. In group sessions and group interviews, it's really important to listen, to soak information in. You may be tempted to speak more slowly or more assertively, depending on the type of job that you're going to be doing. It's really important to listen to what the tasks are and try and make sure that you do be part of a team, because a lot of the time within these group interviews, organizations and managers want to make sure that you can work in a group environment, especially within things like care work, supported housing, within planning. It's quite important that you do work together as a team. And also it's an opportunity for you to showcase your working and leadership skills, be enthusiastic. Obviously drinking water is quite important to stay hydrated. And again, don't forget to ask questions throughout the process and show how interested you are in the role, because I think that's really important that you do ask questions, because it shows the managers in the panel that actually you're really keen, you really want to be part of this organisation. And I think staying positive and keeping a bigger picture in mind is really important, because you want to be positive. You want to come across as a really positive person. So have faith in yourself and be true to yourself. And obviously have faith in your abilities. You've been shortlisted for an interview. You're halfway there. Whatever your feedback, whether it be good or things for you to work on, it's really important that you do take part and stay active. So an informal interview, so these can take many forms, as I've mentioned before. They can be chats over the phone, video calls, meeting up in person. They can take place in various stages of the hiring process, depending on the company's process. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important to find out what their process is, how long the interview process is going to take. Is it going to be 2 stages? Is it going to be 2 or 3? Is it going to be a little bit longer? So it's really important that you do gather that information and work out what you need to be doing, what your process is. Again, be yourself. A lot of the time an informal interview is to gauge what a person is like, what your values are, how you come across in the real world, and how you want to be part of that organization. So it's really important that you do be confident, be bubbly, have some drive, because people want to have a positive experience with people that they're interviewing. So do try and make sure that you are positive. Again, if your interview is on the telephone, rather than sitting down, stand up. Sometimes it can really help to walk around. I do it quite a lot when I'm on the phone. I walk around, because it means that I'm not sat at my desk. And I'll have a conversation with people as I'm walking around to just to be a bit more of a talking point. Have a good conversation with someone can sometimes often help if you're starting to have those conversations. And also, if you know that you're going to be having some form of interview, whether it be phone call or video call, do make sure that you are prepared by having a bit of a look for the organisation before the interview, so that you know what the next steps are. And also make sure that you do follow up from an interview, so find out exactly what the next stage is, because that's really important. And do say to somebody if there's any qualms or questions that they might have about taking to the next stage, ask those questions, and you can try and get some feedback from that as well. So telephone interviews, so they're usually often at the early stages of the recruitment process. It could be tempting to ignore general interview preparation and not do some prep before the interview. However, I think it is really important that you do, again, brush over your CV, look at your application form, pick a spot where you're free from distractions, to make sure that you are 100% engaged with that telephone interview. It could be the first station, it could be an informal chat, but it is really important to have that prep as well. So do try and give yourself a little bit of time to look at some information about what you need to do. Have a notepad and pen handy. Again, like I've mentioned before, have a notepad, scribble things down if you need to, write something down as someone's talking, so that you can go back to it and revisit and maybe ask a question about that question, or it could be something that the manager said that you want more information about. And also, again, it's evident in every single aspect of this webinar, but have a glass of water with you. Your voice is your only tool here, so make sure that you don't have a dry throat, and make sure you get through the telephone interview. So panel interviews, so let's revisit panel interviews. Excuse me. So they're usually carried out at the latter stages of the interview. So it may be the case that you've had a telephone interview, you've then met with one manager, and this could be this final stage of your interview process. So it could be 2 or 3 managers, maybe just 2, maybe just 1, maybe just 2, maybe just 3. And it's probably a mixture of seniority. So it could be line manager and manager. It could be line manager and HR. It could be a line manager within a different part of the business, but you will work quite close together. So it's really important that you do prepare and understand who you're going to be meeting. So do research who the managers are, if they're in HR, if they're a member of the caretaking team, whatever they're doing, do find out exactly what they do, so that you can be prepared of who you're going to be meet. So like I said here, so find out in advance who the members are. So they may be already on the company website, they could be on LinkedIn. Try and connect with them if you do have a LinkedIn profile, and also do a little bit of research with them on what they do in that company, because it can give you some expertise and some talking points about what the future holds within that organisation. Again, greet every member of the panel, introduce yourself. It may be worth you preparing a brief introduction. They might open the interview by saying, tell me about yourself. At that point, you might want to sort of say, introduce yourself and say, hi, my name's Amy. I have been in recruitment for a certain amount of time. I'm really pleased to be shortlisted to this panel interview. And it could be the case that you want to say the reasons why you want to work for that organisation. So a brief introduction about who you are and why you want to work for that organisation, because it is like an elevator pitch. It's about selling you to the organisation to make sure that you're the right person for that job. Again, smile, be positive. There may be questions in a panel interview that may take you back. You might not be able to answer them. Again, it's about thinking, being calm, and trying to think of questions that are really going to help when you come to asking some questions as well. So take your time. And we are going to go into the STAR technique as well, just to give you some examples of where you can go and what some examples you can do. Also, prepare some examples ahead. So you probably would have been maybe had an interview before this. It's very positive that you're going to be brought back for a panel interview or a second stage interview, whether it be second stage or third stage. It's great. It means that you're ticking their boxes what you want to have. What I would probably do for a panel interview is to prepare some examples. So again, look over the job description, see what was in that advert about what they were looking for in the ideal candidate, and provide some examples of where you've done that before. And that really does help you when you're starting to answer questions within the STAR technique. So what we'll do later on is we'll go through that STAR technique. Some questions might be out of the blue. Again, you don't have to give an immediate response and go into an answer straight away. You can take a minute, take a sip of water if that helps. Ask them to repeat the question if you're not 100% sure what the question is. But do take your time. You don't have to rush through an interview. You want to, maybe if you're not sure about the question, ask them to rephrase it. Ask them for an example of what they're looking for. If it's a new business, if it's something new that you haven't done, or your first job, for example, some of you on this call today, you may never have had a job before. If you don't, it's okay to not tick all of the boxes with an interview. It can be really really disheartening if you can't answer a question fully, but just ask them to repeat it. Ask them if you want them to expand any further. Don't be alarmed by asking them questions. That they'll want to hear some questions for you. And again, don't forget to ask questions at the end of the panel. I would say in any interview that I've done, I have not taken people to the next stage of interviews based on their interview and not actually been wanting to give me questions. I want to be put on the hot spot. I want to be asked about questions about my business and about my organization and why I want to work here. So it's really important that you do ask questions, because it shows that you're interested. It shows that you're keen. It shows that you want to work for that organization. And if somebody I interviewed or somebody who comes to interview and they're not interested and they don't ask me any questions, it can be a sign to me that actually you're not interested, you're not keen on the job, you don't want to work for, you don't want to find out more, because in an interview, you can't, like I say before, you're interviewing that organization as well. It's about making sure they're the right fit for you, not necessarily just the right fit for them. So it is really important to ask questions when you come to the end of the interview. So there's different types of interviews. There's lots of information to take away from this session, and these slides will be available to you at the end of the session. You might be told by the interview that it's going to be a structured interview, which means that every single candidate will get the same set of questions, and it's based on a scoring system. So it's about giving as much information as you can about the answers that you're giving. So it means that everybody's going to be asked the same questions. It could be a situational interview. So you could be given lots of scenarios or how you deal with situations. This really helps talking about the STAR technique, which I'm going to go on to. It's about thinking of a scenario, how you've helped, how you've developed, and what was the outcome. So you could be asked, how have you dealt with a difficult situation? How you fixed a problem an organisation had? How you dealt with somebody who wasn't working as part of a team. These are things that you can think about now and prepare for, so that when you do come to the interview, you can have more of a chance at thinking and answering some questions. Unstructured interviews, these tend to be spontaneous, so it can be more question and answer in terms of conversational. Informal interviews are very unstructured. It's about them asking you questions, you responding, you answering, asking questions as well. So it's really important to have a dialogue and have an open understanding of what's happening within that interview. And also behavioural interviews. So sometimes when it comes to the latter stages of interviews, it could be the case that that organisation does some form of behavioural psychometrics testing or something like that. It's good for you to have that information beforehand, to know exactly how you answer questions in a behavioural type of way. So how would you behave in a certain situation? If there was an emergency within a care home, how would you behave that? What would the answer be that you give? So it's quite important that you do look at the types of interviews you might have, and obviously think of some questions as well. So the STAR technique. So the STAR technique is used in many, many, many interview formats. It's called it's a way of working out a technique of how you've delivered something. So rather than just when an organization asks you, how did you deal with this situation, not just saying the end goal, you want to describe the situation, the tasks, the action that you did, and the result. Okay, so introduce the situation. So for example, if somebody asked how I dealt with, I don't know, maybe a customer complaint. So how I dealt with a difficult situation. So I could give the example of a customer complaint. So within that situation, I would explain the situation. So how I dealt with this difficult situation was we had a customer complaint that had a complaint about a product that we'd sold to an organization, sold to them, that there wasn't working what it should be. So you're in that situation, you're setting the scene. So what was the complaint? Why it came to you? What the situation was? So what happened? What was the reason for you dealing with that task? And then we moved on to the task. So describe the task. So what needed to be done and why? So from a customer complaint, you wanted to understand why there was a complaint, how you can resolve that with the customer, what you need to do, what you did, or what you wanted to do within that task. So that was example that the challenges the customer had, so listening to what they had to say, and also the issues that they had. And the action. So what action did you take? So you listened to the customer, you relayed their concerns, you listened to what they had to say, you took everything on board, you found out what the problem was, what their issue was. If something didn't work and they weren't happy about it, obviously if you pay for something, you want to make sure it works. So what did you do? So whether it be talk to somebody, maybe you had to investigate first and come back to the customer and find out what you did. And then it could be the case that you had to go to another one of your colleagues about finding out how you can resolve that complaint, and also the result. At the end of that conversation with an unhappy customer, it could be the case that the situation, they were unhappy with a problem, you investigated that there was an issue at your end, you fixed the issue, and the result that they were a happy customer. Or it could be something to do with you've done something within cost savings, you've saved them some money, they were paying a fortune for whatever product, you've now managed to get them a deal. So it's about breaking up your examples into 4 sections. So what was the situation? What was the problem? What was the task? Why were you involved? And what was the task for you to do? What action you took? So what did you do to resolve it? And also the result. Were they happy? Did they come back to you? Did they want to work with you again? It could be lots of different things. So it could be an emergency. For an example, there was an emergency in a care home. Someone had fallen down. There was nobody else there. You had to raise the alarm bells, call the emergency service, look after, call for help. It's about the action that you take. So the action was you put somebody in a recovery position, you called for help, you called 911, you called 999, and then the result was that person got the care that they needed. Ambulance came, took over the situation. So it's about how you deal in certain situations. So it's really important that you do think about what happened, the task in hand, the action, and the result. So questions to ask your interview. So I've mentioned this previously. It's really, really, really important. And I would say probably one of my top tips are really important about asking questions. Managers want to know that you're interested. So if you can ask them questions at the end of the interview, it could be the case that throughout the interview process, you're asking questions, and they're answering them. You want to try and do have a conversation with people, because sometimes that makes you a bit more comfortable and a bit more confident in an interview. So questions I would always be interested to ask. So why does that manager work there? If they've worked there for 15 years, why have they worked there for 15 years? How have they seen the business change? Lots of organizations have changed during the pandemic. So now is the organisation, are you all remote working? Is it hybrid? What's the expectation of working in the office 2 or 3 days a week? What's the organisation's long-term plans within hybrid and remote working schedules? Have they changed their onboarding process, or what is their onboarding process? What would happen next if they were successful in that organisation? If you're going to be managed by this person, so what's their management style? How will they manage you? Do they have a really firm and fair management style, or will they let you get on with your job in hand? It will depend on the job that you're going for. Ask them what your first 90 days would look like. So what would your 3 months be like within that organisation? It puts a manager on the spot to think about what they can do for you to make sure that you accept their position. What are the team's goals? So if you're going to be working in a team, what are their goals? Whether it be financial goals, whether it be team goals. What is the team like? What makes up the team? Is there any skills that they're missing within that team that you could be part of within their skill set? So like I said, what skills are missing that you could be the new hire to fill in? And what projects are immediately going to be addressed? So what, like I said, with your first 90 days, what's that going to look like within the business? As I have banged on in this webinar, in this workshop, is not only are managers interviewing you, but you are interviewing managers, and managers do get nervous. Sometimes people get put on the spot, just like you've been put on a spot to answer those questions. So it is really, really important that you do ask questions at the end of an interview, because it really does show how engaged you are with that organisation, and it comes across that you're passionate and you want to work for them. It could be something about that you've read on, it could be an article they've published on LinkedIn. It could be something that the company have done recently. Have they just moved to a 9-day fortnight, or they're working part-time hours, or they've relocated, or they've done something fantastic? If it's for a local council, for example, they may have had some staff awards. Who won? Why do they won? How can you be involved? So it's really important that you do ask questions, because they want to make sure that you're interested in the role. So that is mainly the questions today. I know I've got a couple of questions in the Q&A sessions. So I see one of the questions is, I fail all the time at face-to-face interviews. I think as long as you're prepared for face-to-face interviews, I think it's really important that you are prepared, that you know your CV, you know what you know what you want to talk about, you know your examples, and think of some examples to hand of, look at the job description, look at the things that they're looking for. So in any advert, it should tell you what they're looking for in their candidate. So just make sure that you're prepared. If you're prepared, then you've done your best. If you haven't prepared, then that sometimes can be disheartening. It means you haven't had the right experience. So to make sure that you are prepared. So I know a couple of you are raising hands. Unfortunately, I can't take questions live, because this is a webinar and it has been recorded, obviously, for your confidentiality. But I have got a couple of questions that I'm going to go through in the inbox. So about different strategies for panel interviews, informal interviews. So an informal interview is just a chat sometimes. A formal interview would be a panel interview where you're having questions and answers. An informal interview is a bit more of a chat. So it's a little less formal. It could just be on the phone, or it could be an informal interview could be following an actual face-to-face interview, just to gauge your experience and have a bit more of an in-depth chat of the job. So there's a couple of questions here about Excel tests. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different tests depending on the industry and the organisation that you're working for. Some organisations do, for example, if you're a typist and you want to be a typist or a PA, for example, you do have to do some tests. It would be good maybe if you had a little look online for some example tests. I know there's lots of free tests out there. Maybe this is something I can look into for you, and I will have all of your questions at the end. So there's another question here. What if you've answered all of your planned questions by the end of the interview? I think this is something that you might have already had planned questions, but there's probably things that you probably think of in the interview. If you think of something and then just jot it down while you're in an interview, that's fine to do. Don't be disheartened not to do that. I think it's really important that you ask them what the next step is of the interview. They might not have told you that. They might not have told you what their plans are for the future. It could be the case that you might think of something from the interview that you might want to ask. I don't think they're going to answer all of your questions. It could be the case of what's a typical day like in this organisation? What's a fun thing your team do outside of work? There's lots of questions I think that you could answer, that you could ask them in that interview. I think another question here is about mock interviews. I think mock interviews are really important for whatever job you're going for. I think it's really important to practice your answers. So I think any interview you do, whether it be a customer services job or a head of finance job, it is really important that you do mock interviews. I think there's a couple of questions about the STAR technique. I think it's really important to think of some examples and write it down. It's really important to write your answers down. Are you fulfilling the situation, task, action, results? Write them down. It doesn't have to be war and peace. It's about thinking of examples that you've done previously and giving some examples of what you've done before. So I think by writing it down, putting it into those sections, and actually that will make you remember it and be more thorough in your answers. There's also another question here about job descriptions. Yes, I think definitely by looking through the job description, you're probably going to get a really good understanding of what they're looking for. If you look at a personal specification, for example, it will show the criteria that you're looking at. So on a job description, there may be some form of personal specification on the back of that. So things that they are desirable, essential, what they're looking for. So I think it can give you tips of what you're looking for. For example, if you're working in childcare, do you know the legislation of working around childcare? Give examples of that. There, it's really important that you do look over the job description to make sure that you know what you're going through. There's a couple of other questions. There's a couple of questions here about disabilities. It's whatever you're comfortable with. If what should have happened in your interview process is that people should ask you if you need any reasonable adjustments. So if you feel say to an organisation, I need a reasonable adjustment for whatever reason, it means that they will be more, they will have to give you that information or that support. So it could be things like having access on the ground floor. It could be using the stairs rather than the lift. It could be having access to the questions before your interview. So it's about feeling as comfortable as you are. So it depends how comfortable you are within your disability and what you want to share, because you don't have to share any information. You're not under any illusion to share that. There's also a couple of things about using presentations. I would say opt for PowerPoint or use Google Slides if you've got Google. It can be whatever you're comfortable with. You may want to ask the question of what sort of format they're looking for within a panel, a presentation interview. There's some other questions here about strengths. It's quite a difficult question to ask. There's lots of really good questions here, and what I will try and do for you is have a look at the questions that I've been asked today and maybe put some top tips in from that to send out at a later date. I think it's really important that you're prepared, that you should be over prepared so that you know exactly what you're talking about and how you want to relay your information in the future. I think, yes, bring notes if that makes you feel comfortable. You're not going to be marked down for having some notes with you. I think it's really important that you are prepared. And if having notes to an interview is going to make you feel more comfortable, then yes, definitely. And also it means that you can write down questions that you want to ask the panel, which can be quite positive. What are common questions in the interview? Oh, there's loads of common questions in an interview. So things like, how do you perform well in a team? How do you work in a team? What's your recent experience within working within this industry, in this area? I would really have a look at the job description, and you can sort of telltale what sort of interview questions you'd be looking at. And there's lots of help online to that there. And yes, check your notes. If you want to check your notes in a question, just say, if you are unsure about something, then yes, have a look at your CV, have a look at your notes. In terms of teamwork, it depends what sort of job you're looking for and what job you're going for. There's lots of teamwork questions about how you work in a team, how you perform in a team, what team environment you would work in. It really depends. I think it really depends on the job that you're going for, but I think working in a team is important. Whether you've worked in a team in another organisation, or you've worked in a team at school, college, you're part of the netball team, you play some sport, football, whatever, I think it's really important. What I will do is I've tried to get us through as many questions as I have within that time. I'm obviously conscious of time moving forward. What I will try and do is have a look at some common questions and see if I can help and provide some extra information. What would be really good if we can have some of your skills. I'm going to go back to another poll, and if there is any topics you want to hear about for next questions and answers, then we'd be more than happy to look at more interview and more topics for our next webinar. So if there's anybody who'd like to put in some information there in terms of salary benchmarking, preparing for psychometric tests, or putting together a career plan, it'd be really helpful for things. So I'll give that a couple of minutes, well, a couple of seconds really, because I'm sure there's just buttons for you to hit. I'm going to end that poll now. So nerves are one of those things where we all get nervous. I was nervous today to do a webinar. I know it's not interactive. I know we're not face to face, and I'm stood up in a room of 100+ people. But nerves get the better of all of us. And don't forget that actually people who are interviewing you will also get nervous. So don't be shocked or alarmed if you get nervous. It's one of those things where we all get nervous. Don't let nerves get the better of you. Prepare, practice, and make sure that you are really comfortable in providing that interview in that area. So yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do within that. So what I would like to say is thank you very much. Oh, I've got some top tips, actually. I've got some top tips. Sorry about that. I've forgotten I've got some top tips. So dress to impress. Make sure that you arrive early for your interview. Take a notepad and pen, just to recap. Be personable to everybody that you meet. Whether you meet somebody opening the door, whether you meet somebody in the waiting room, be nice to everybody you meet. I think there's stories where people have been interviewed and had a really awful experience, and then they find out that the person who was there was the person that was interviewing them. Don't panic, be honest. Ask them about the next steps, and don't forget to follow and thank up for them in time. It might also be a good idea to send them a thank you email at the end of the session, just to say thank you very much for your time. And also thank you very much for joining the session. I hope you found it useful. I've tried to get through as many questions as I could within that chat. Like I said, I'll probably try and put together some information for you. What I will put in the chat box is some top tips for you. So you should be able to see that following on from our webinar. This recording will be sent out, also the top tips. And if you work in the public sector and want to share your stories about why you love your job, then our marketing team would really love to hear from you. But I would just like to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for our time. And I wish you all of the best in your interviews. And I hope each and every one of you are successful and that you found this webinar helpful. So thank you very much for your help and support today. Thanks for joining. Have a great afternoon and best of luck in your interviews moving forward.